Welcome to the talk show where men unite, having conversations that inspire, ignite. From relationships to wellness, we cover it all. In this positive space, we're standing tall. We're the men of the talk show, spreading good vibes.
All right, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Men's Talk Show. We are so glad to have you with us and watching and connecting, commenting. It really motivates us to continue to put out good content for you guys. So for today, we got another special guest. His name is Jonathan Jacobs. He's based in LA. He's a digital marketer. I said based in LA, but his heart's in New York. So he's kind of conflicted when it comes to the sports teams, but he roots for the Mets and the Jets. So he has that going for him. Just don't say that outside when the Lakers are playing. He has a passion for supporting men's mental health and creating equitable organizations in his community. And so we look forward to this conversation. So again, welcome, Jonathan, to the Men's Talk Show.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Wayne. I so appreciate being able to be here today. It's a real treat. As your listeners have probably guessed, it's a very tough time for me always to be a fan of the teams I'm a fan of. So I thank them for keeping me in their thoughts throughout the sporting year. And I'll tell you, someone once gave me the best compliment I've ever got. They said, you deliver Los Angeles information in New York packaging. So when I say my soul is in New York, that's why.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's definitely cultures there, unique to their own city and people.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more complimentary than people will give it credit for, but they're definitely different. And I also think, as I'm sure we'll get into today, I went to Los Angeles from New York in October of 2020. And I think the journey of growth of mental health, of men's work, of just, changing my own life that I've been on in the time since then, I don't think it would have been possible in New York. So I'm so grateful to California and Los Angeles for being the place where I've landed the past few years to be able to have had the journey that I've had, because I don't think it would have been possible had I not left where I was.
Yeah, so let's get into that. So you made the move during October 2020. We all know what that year was all about in the 2 years afterwards. So was this something you were thinking about prior to the pandemic, or it was an opportunity because the talk of mental health was really coming to the forefront during the pandemic?
Yeah, I would say so. It was something I was thinking about in abstract, but not in practice. My full story is that I was raised in the suburbs of New York on Long Island. I went to school in Washington, D.C. I was hoping to stay there after college, but didn't necessarily play out that way with some other decisions I was working on and making. Ended up back in the New York tri-state area and was living in Queens for about a decade. And at that point, I was dating a girl who was a documentary filmmaker. And right before the pandemic, we were considering moving bi-coastal to split time between LA and New York. I had always been interested in leaving New York. I just never knew where I wanted to go. And eventually, obviously, the pandemic started. Bi-coastal plans were scrapped, and a month or two in, we lived at the time of the Midtown Tunnel, so just all day long there were sirens going past our apartment, going out to the Queens-based hospitals, and it was listen, we were blessed and privileged that we were in an apartment, and even if it was small, it's still 2 bedrooms. We had spaces. We didn't have anyone in the first few months that was immediately affected in our community, so for us it was just, we didn't lose our jobs. It was just a factor of comfort more than anything else. But I think as we all learned, even when comfort was threatened, it was a real mental health challenge and a real challenge for all of us to get through. So eventually the decision just became, well, why not just go? We were talking about this before. Why don't we just rip a Band-Aid and commit? So I forget if it was in May or June, I drove down to my family and spent a few weeks with them. She spent a few weeks with her family in Michigan. And then we drove out west and there was no looking back.
That's interesting. So thanks for sharing. It was definitely a tough time for all of us during that. So for me, I was in Bahrain. Yeah. And so, before the full force of the pandemic, while they were doing lockdowns in the States, we were still open and being able to do what we want. Things started down, but we were still allowed to go outside. You wear masks, things like that. So I was fortunate. I was still able to be out and in community. Then when I came back to the States in August of 2020, it was a big adjustment, wearing the mask everywhere. Cause I'm here in Washington, so wearing the mask, don't know if you can go to restaurants and things like that. I definitely had friends who were affected, and which helped me kind of want to start something like this.
How did it feel to be displaced from what I imagine is a solid chunk of your friends and family community domestically when you were living in Bahrain while all this started?
Oh, it was interesting. I would say that because my wife's from her family as well. So her family's over there, and my family was in the States. We would have, fortunately, there's Zoom and all these things like that. To connect that way, hearing them like, oh, this person got COVID. Oh, this person got
Right.
COVID until Thanksgiving, around Thanksgiving time frame, and then one the Thanksgiving who had COVID, and then it spread amongst the
Mhm.
family. And fortunately, no one passed away, but they were reeling with those effects of it for weeks.
Right. Right.
And yeah, and so it was. I had third who was a single mom. Son was in New York City in Brooklyn, and there was days where like she wouldn't be able to speak to her. She's not what's happening, and is he okay? So um, you know worldwide it was truly a
I guess it's also hard because it's like, well, we couldn't we're geographically closer. There's not much we could do, right? We were supposed to be isolated and alone.
Yeah.
yeah.
So what type of coping mechanism did you use to deal with, like, being isolated?
I think I was one of those thought at the beginning, oh, this has been my dream my whole life, not have to interact with people. I get to be at home and do nothing. And I think like all of us, we started out with the work happy hours and whatever. And I would say a weird silver lining. My business did very at the beginning of the pandemic because we were a digital marketing agency, right? So everybody was moving their advertising spend online because that was the only place or I shouldn't say the only, but the majority place where commerce was happening. So I would say the things that exist at the front of my life were keeping me so busy that sitting in the reality of what had happened or what was happening didn't really impact me too much right away. But when it really started to become a factor, and when also, which also exists at the start of my men's work journey, is so I mentioned before we drove out west, and what we did at first was we spent a month in San Diego in an Airbnb, and we were going to do that before we moved up to Los Angeles permanently. And we're sitting there in this Airbnb one day, and I'm sitting at the table. I have my monitor set up and my laptop, and I'm chugging away doing work. And all of a sudden, I get a call from my mom, and it's like as your parents do, they call you in the middle of the workday. They're retired, and they think you have nothing going on. And so I ignore it. And then all of a sudden she calls me twice. And in that moment, I could feel my spine straighten and the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I was like, something has happened. I don't know what it is, but we are not a call twice family. So if I'm getting called back to back, this is serious. And it's the kind of thing where I'm just looking at the phone where I'm knowing the minute I answer this, everything changes. I don't know what's on the other end of this, but this is something that my life will never look the same again. And so I answered it. And to make a very long story short, my father was in the hospital. He had been, dead for like 6 or 7 minutes and then came back to consciousness. He was like, he had been throwing up blood while he was at home, like all terrible, terrible things. And this was the start of a journey of him being out for 2 weeks and then dying from kidney failure, from liver failure. So that I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. And that I would say was the start of this moment where I started to, obviously that's the grieving process for a parent, which is its own piece. But that's when I started to cope with the reality, I think, of what COVID meant for all of us. Because I think, again, I was hitting pause on everything. Finally, that was my life. I didn't lose a job at the start of the pandemic. I didn't lose a family member. Yes, I went from working in an office to working remotely, but I worked in the same neighborhood. So for all intents and purposes, a lot of my life was the same. But in this moment, there were all these pieces of how I would be able to grieve my father that were different because of the pandemic than what they would be normally. I'm Jewish, so we have a Shiva call, right? And people come to the house all the time over the course of pretty much a week, and they're bringing food, you're sharing food, you're hanging out, you're talking, whatever. So instead of that, we just had all these people that were sending us food, and it was like we were in like Grey Gardens or something. We were just surrounded by all this food that we eat, and we felt like these four, my mother, my ex-girlfriend, and my sister and I live in this house, just surrounded by all this food we couldn't eat, like all these flowers, all these cards, and it was so strange in a way because we were robbed of being in community with people and get a hug and have a conversation. Absolutely. And there's so many feelings you have about that. There's jealousy because everyone else is going to get that and I'm not. There's anger. I'm going to give it to you, but I'm not going to get it back from you in this moment when I need it. There's loneliness of not being able to be around them. There was just, and then there's anger and annoyance at this whole thing that had happened, need to happen. And now I'm having to pay this price, and our family's having to pay a price in this way. And, even weird things like, you would watch, my mom watched a lot of, you'd put on Day Show or Good Morning America in the mornings, and they would have a segment on like the lives lost due to COVID. And they would tell you these personal stories of each person. And then, well, my dad died too, and he didn't die of COVID, but why is he worthy of a clip on the morning news show? But these people are, right? Like all these things that you would never normally think about are just manifesting in different ways. And so that was the start of a major journey. That obviously I was not in talk therapy at that moment in time, but then that was the impetus for me, obviously, to go back to it, because I knew I was going to need to talk to someone about how we process all of that. So that what I would say, like that August, September period is when I, with the reality, what 2020 really looked like. It's a very long answer to your question. Sorry.
No worries. Well, thanks for sharing the story. And we definitely understand, we call it a homecoming, when our family members pass away, the family comes, it's time to celebrate their life that they had and how they impacted you. And you share that amongst, your family, your community, and you talk about the stories and where they did this silly thing, or they had this, don't do this because that annoys them type of things. And you share it, and it kind of helps with the grieving process. And when you don't have that, it takes away from that whole thing. And and so I definitely can relate to what you were saying there. That you're at that point where you need to go back to talk therapy, and you're dealing with emotions. And then, so what was the next step after that to get you on your journey?
Yeah. So, and again, at this point, I had just moved out so no, I didn't have a huge community generally. I didn't have practitioners who were licensed in state. So I was having to start from scratch again. So for me, it was, I think I use Psychology Today, like find a tool to find someone locally. I hate saying the interview, but that to me is always what the is at the beginning. We're interviewing each other to determine if we're the right fit together. So I met with, 3 or 4 therapists. And, I said I kind of had my key issues that I wanted to know. First, they were being able to communicate with me about. And, for me, it was things like I was in an interracial relationship. So were they able to give me advice and guidance in that situation, dealing with the grief of the situation that I was in as far as COVID, also moving into the community and being in a new area was really important. And at that point in time, I wanted it to be a woman. I had only ever done at that point, I'm 30, am I 30 years old? I'm 30, 31. I had only ever done therapy at that point, or female identifying individuals. And I'd probably been in therapy with 3 different therapists at that point. And we worked together probably for about a year. And I've written about this publicly before. It was a great journey, but it was one of the first times that I reached a point where I was like, I think you've taken me as far as you can take me. And for me to continue this journey, I actually have to go see a man. I have to start being in therapy with a man. I think it's really important for me to be vulnerable with a man in that way, because I have a father wound that I have to heal. And me talking to a woman about it is just reinforcing a line of dialogue that I'm already having. But I need to break my discomfort in being vulnerable and sharing with men, and like a male therapist who has like a paternal, even if it's not a father figure, like that type of like, or just a more kind of non-symmetrical relationship with me. I think it's when it's a friend is basically what I'm trying to say. I needed to have that to be able to heal so that I could repair my relationship with men, because my relationship with my mother was very, very difficult and very complicated. So I was with her for about a year doing that, and then, broke up with her, and I moved on and found a man who fortunately referred to me by our couples therapist at the time. And that was huge leaps and bounds forward in mental health journey there too.
Well, I want to say, we talked about this in the previous episode before. When people think I go to therapists, I found one counselor therapist, all people, but you think that, okay, I met with one, but no, like you said, it may take interviewing 3 or 4 of them to see, do they have the right experiences? Do they have the right mindset? Is it a good fit? Both sides, not the therapist side and your side. And I hope people, what you were just saying is that, went to therapy and it didn't work out. Maybe that therapist wasn't you. Try another one. It may take 3 or 4 times till you find the one that really connects.
Yeah. And I think, as with anything, and I'm sure you've both experienced this before, is you got to know what you want out of the person you're working with before you start to go with them. It's not just, do we get along, but it's like, here's what I need help with, or here's where I'm struggling. Are you equipped to work on that with me? So like, I had my little scorecard. Like, have you done things like that before, where it's like, I know or do you know what you're looking for when you start talking to a potential therapist or social worker or whoever it is that you're going to be working with?
So when I first went, no, I had no clue. You know, it was just, okay, you're the person I'm supposed to speak to. What about, like, you're just waiting for their feedback. You're waiting for the criticism. Tell me what I need to do, right? And that's not what therapy is, but that's what we're looking for. We want the easy way. This is my problem. What do you think I should do? And, you know, so it takes some time until you realize, like, that's not what therapists do. Just tell you, this is your plan. Like, you talk about it, and they look at it in a way that give you another to look at your experiences, look at your past available. And, you know, sometimes that different perspective is what we truly need to say, wow, you know, I thought about it like that.
Yeah. I can also definitely agree. Like, I had a therapist, and she was a white. Clearly thought she would never understand me, but I gave her a chance, and she kept asking me a lot of questions to kind of get who I was, what I wanted out of it. Wayne said, like, I was expecting her to fix all my problems. So, like, I allow all my problems. This, I'm lonely, need friends, needed a spouse or a girlfriend or whatever. And she's like, it's good, but I can't actually solve this. You got to do the work. You got to work on yourself every day to come up with solutions to help you. I'm here to help you, guide you along the way, and give you, critique and answers for it. But I can't actually come in and physically change your problems just like that. You know?
All right. Oh, the forever problem of people expecting the therapist will do the work for them.
Yeah, you have to do the work. That's you have
100%.
You're on a journey for you, and that's what I didn't understand at first. But then, once I understood that, then I kind of warmed up to her. I was a little bit hesitant because she's a white woman, and I thought she would never been relatable. But she ended up being the best therapist of my life. I was with her for 2 years. And, she was young like me. So in that aspect, we could relate. And just because I'm white, that doesn't mean I can't relate to you. And ever since then, she was a cool woman. Like, I miss her. I don't see her anymore because she had to, unfortunately, transfer to different, like the VA hospital to, counsel them. But if I can get her in a heartbeat, I would. I completely understand what you were saying, Jonathan. Like, it does take the time to find the right type of therapist for you. You have to go through and be vulnerable and get into those deep, hard questions that they ask you, because sometimes they don't know all the answers, just like you don't know all the answers. You work together to try to figure it out. But that brings me to some other questions that I want to kind of ask you. So, you went through all of this self-discovery, and, hopefully better at this point. When did you become like an men's mental health?
So I think it's very tied to that I've already started telling you about my father. So, going back to before I even started going back to therapy, on his deathbed, but he was an alcoholic. And I had never known that my entire life. I never got to talk to him about it because he was unconscious for the remainder of his. And it set me on this journey of like, how the hell does that happen in a family? How do you keep a secret that? How does nobody talk about it? How does nobody know? How is it hidden? I obviously do my own reflection of like, did I miss the signs? And then of course, like then it also brings to, well, how much pain was he in? What had happened in his life that this was what he turned to, and didn't have any means to ask for help, to talk about it, to get what he needed, to try to address the situation. Like, there's so many things so many roads I now wanted to go down to improve my understanding, but also make it so that never happened again. As complicated as my relationship with my father was, it's not like I wished he were dead. And it's not like he wasn't someone who was deserving of love or a life that he enjoyed. I think I'm not a therapist, but I think a lot of issues with my father were just because he was so desperate for love, but he only knew how to give and get it on his terms. He didn't know how to adjust and scale that for what someone else needed. And I think that's what led to him feeling so disconnected from so many other people. So I'm going through that journey. I start going to therapy again. I eventually, for my own purposes, kind of like write it as a book to get a little bit deeper and process my trauma around all of it. But as I'm going through this process of dealing with his death, writing about it, going back to therapy for, at that point, probably the first time in at least 2 or 3 years. I got introduced to a friend of mine. So a lot of my background as a professional is in book publishing and thought leadership. Friend of mine connected me with a woman who was affiliated with an organization called A Call to Men, founded by Tony Porter and Ted Bunch. And they had a book coming out for young and teen boys called The Book of Dares. And they just wanted to have a conversation about, like, how do we market this? How do we help get it in the hands of men who need to read it? So we had hopped on a call together, was just really impressed by what I had heard. And I ended up signing up for their virtual training institute, which was two half-day, so 4 or 6-hour Zoom sessions about, men's work, gender justice, racial justice, etc. And I was like, that's like when I was born into this iteration of who I am today. I think it was a really integrating moment for me of starting to bring together the personal and professional in really important ways, and also starting to see the bigger picture of the work that we need to do as a collective to really bring about a change and safety for men. And so that I would say that moment of that virtual training institute I did with them is really what birthed me as a men's mental health advocate.
Got it. And the key point there, you heard is, through your networks, you found that, and then an opportunity took it too. Oftentimes, but we're afraid to take it. We're afraid to say, let me try this. This is something out of my comfort zone, but take that step and try it. And you did with virtual training they had, and it really is doing.
I think it's interesting, like, it's so easy to dislike something or to have a problem with it without ever looking at what it is. And there are so many webinars I've sat in, there are so many books I've read, there's so many YouTube videos I've watched, there's articles that I read online, and you're like, you know what? Don't agree with this at all, but at least I expose myself to it, and now I can make an informed decision about it, right? Like Joe Rogan, I'll watch an episode of his podcast, and then I'll think critically about, did I laugh at this? Did I not laugh at that? Did I agree with that point? Did I not agree with that point? Right? Like, this, for me, this is just information, and I'm going to choose the way I feel about it. But when it's out there and hundreds of thousands and millions of people are watching it, and it's informing them, and it's how they make their decisions about things, how can I cut myself off it is without at least trying to understand the message that's within there and what's appealing about it? So it's like, yeah, you've got to step outside that comfort zone, because that's your comfort zone, because that's else's comfort zone. So if you want to connect with them and understand them, you got to understand what they feel comfortable within.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a true marketer right there.
We're
Talk to me long enough, keep happening.
We're coming up on time, but I did want to kind of ask you one more question and leave the conversation open if Wayne had another. This was a question I was kind of curious about. You don't have to answer this, but like you mentioned with your father, I kind of suffer too, having, being able to communicate with that, and a lot stem from childhood trauma from him. But at a point, did you ever feel like you wounds with your father, or is it just something that you're going to continuously work on?
First of all, I'll say this: you can ask me anything you want. I think it's really important. I am never a believer that there is such a thing on oversharing on a first date or a first podcast interview. So we can talk about anything. So I'll say this as a way to answer your question. I think I've accepted you can sit with two realities. My father, I had a very privileged upbringing. I never wanted for anything. He always put for the table, and he worked hard to do that, and he wanted to provide. And he had a great sense of generosity. He was always giving to charity and wanting to do good things and all of those things. I had so many things that young people growing up did not have to do. And I was able to go to a prestigious, private university and have good schools and have a car, etc. And that's amazing. Really thank him for that. He also fucked me. I don't know if I can curse. Sorry, screwed me up in a lot of screwed me up in a lot of different ways. And with him, and he prevented me from having a relationship with my siblings for many years. And I'm angry about what he took away from my mother in terms of her chance to have relationships with her other children. And I am so frustrated by who he was and the way he made certain people feel. And that's the duality of any man, any woman, any person. We contain multitudes. And I think what we have to do is recognize, like, I sit with both of these thoughts. He was good in these ways. He was bad in these ways. And that doesn't make him a great person or a bad person. It just makes him a person. And we all have this. I'm sure if you talk to anyone in my life, they will tell you my bad things and my good things. And it's like, ultimately this is me. And if I didn't have those other pieces, I'd be. So I think there's still things that I process from time to time, because there are things you forget that just kind of come up, and it's like, I got to sit anew with that. But I think to the point where I start to have a better understanding of why he did what he did. And when I have that, I can find peace with it. And I think that's a huge part of like finding out he was an alcoholic, right? I said to my mom, I was like, the thing is that I was fighting him with one arm to my back. I was fighting him, not knowing the pain that he was really in. I thought he was just an asshole, but no, he was hurting. And, and so fighting him with one arm, who knows if I had that, I was going to be able to fight better or hug him and embrace him and help him. I'm not saying it could have changed him, but at least the way I approach him could have been really different. So, is it healed? I don't know. It's kind of like, is there thing as closure? No, I go back and found out a lot, but I think I have found a better place to exist with him in my life now.
Yeah. You got to be able to see the full picture. While, and I really understand what you're saying is two truths can be a time, right? You can have one and one A and one B, and they both are the same thing. And so I really appreciate you sharing that.
Can I say one other thing on that topic real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, we talked about death at the start of this conversation, one of my favorites, but we talked about death at the beginning here. And as you're talking about sitting with two ideas, I think, one of the things that I've always felt very strongly about is we cultures do a terrible job dealing with grief and death. I don't think we talk about it enough. I don't think we've built comfort. Like, it's an uncomfortable subject because it's end of life, but we need to be comfortable with that because we know it's coming for all of us. And going through that process during COVID was fascinating. Going through it generally was fascinating, but also it's the same idea with that, right? Like, his death, I feel terrible. It was very sad. And I feel bad that his life had to end the way it did, but also because he is dead, the relationship that I have with my mother and with my siblings is better than it's ever been. And we have been able to do things we wouldn't have been able to do when he was alive. And I'm grateful for that. Am I grateful he's dead? No, but I'm grateful that I have this opportunity to build a family that we never had before. And like, I shouldn't have to feel guilty for saying that. So I try very hard to put that out there, because I think, again, it's just, we've got to improve how we talk about these subjects. And that's a part of the mental health journey. That's a part of identity journey. I just think it's really important work. So I want to make sure I say that, because I'm sure there's others there who go through grief and are unsure how to about it. And I wish I had more examples of that when I was going through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. You shouldn't, you said it brilliantly. You shouldn't feel guilty about being able to or have those relationships now, because he was in the way of that. But at the same time, you don't wish him dead. You kind of wish he was still here. So again, both those can be true at the same time. You don't have to do one way or another way. And real quick, I just want to say, what is some of the work that you're doing in LA that people can connect?
For sure. So anyone can find me on my website, which is jonathanjacobs.com. But if you're in the Los Angeles area, I would encourage you to join me for one of two things. One, I'm a runner, and I'm a part of a run club called Keep It Run 100. We meet in Tuesdays in Culver City, Thursdays in Inglewood. It is not my community that I started. It's just a great community, and I love it, and you should absolutely come. But if you're interested in hanging out with me in a space that I manage, on Sundays at 4:30 in Hermosa Beach, I get a group of men together for Men Walking, Men Talking. We take a short 45-minute walk, have light conversation. There's no agenda. There's no other than just connection and meeting other men. And we're only about a month or two in, but it's really been a beautiful space. So definitely drop me an email and I can share you some more information about it.
Yeah, I definitely will. We do thank you, Jonathan, for being vulnerable with us. We know it's not talking about, trauma from the past. We know it's not easy talking about like being a journey of self-discovery and being able to heal, but we appreciate that because it's going to help some men that's struggling right now. They might be going through the same thing you're going through. So we do.
Well, thank you for making this space, right? You've done the work to build this and attract people to it. I just show up. That's the easy part, and you guys make
it part of it. That's why it's called the Men's Talk Show.
Yes,
it's not called the Way. It's not called the Rhymes. The Men's, like you guys will make the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. That was great. And if I'm ever in LA, I don't know when it is, but if I'm ever out there, I'll definitely look you up and join you for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's go. That's a wrap, guys. I will message you, Jonathan. So just go ahead, and I think you already subscribed to the channel as well too. And if you have any social media links, please send them my way too. So
yes, for sure.
Right, peace.
Awesome. It was great, guys. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Take care. Enjoy your Sunday.
Welcome to the talk show where men unite, having conversations that from relationships to wellness, we cover it all in this positive space. We're standing tall. We're the men of the talk show, spreading good vibes.